Right, back again, guys. We got dropped off, and I was speaking about Egypt and how all of this Tartarian buildings, which I filmed in Queensland and Gympie, all go back to Rome, Greece, etc., and they all sort of seem to have a similar motif, pattern and style of buildings, etc. So I really did a really nice introduction there for Mike, and we've got him now and fixed all our Skype issues. So welcome on, Mike. Nice to have you.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Not a problem, not a problem. So you can just jump in. I introduced your video, your series and everything, and everyone knows. I read your blurb there, so everybody's ready for you. I guess we could just go straight from where I know you, and that's the video that I introduced there, which I posted on Facebook, Petrified Titans and Organs, and we can just address that first. How about that?
Sure. Yeah. What would you like to know?
Well, I've been researching this quite a bit, so I know that I can see the pareidolia always have in clouds, in buildings, in cars, everywhere, because I believe I have a very interesting way to look at it, and I can't not believe it. It's just too overwhelming not to, and that is that everything is conscious. You see, it's the monad being the one God, then becomes the dyad being the two, and then the triad, then the tetrad, and on it goes. And that let's call it that image is ingrained in all the DNA that reverberates through the universe. And so clouds, everything, there are spirits in the trees, there are spirits in the clouds, and some of them are slowed down and they're rocks, and some of them are speeding up and they're clouds and they're misty, and but it's all this conscious energy in the universe, and it all has a face and a body, and we will always see this, and so these titans, there's many Babylonian and Egyptian legends talking about the gods becoming mud and how everything became mud and etc. So I've got a very theological and mythological take to it as well. But I saw your video there, and it's really good. I've also got other researchers who claim that these are buildings. These were great Titanic buildings as well. I can see that as well. So there's a couple of channels that have covered it from that perspective, and I think they're spot on. A lot of these supposed structures that were carved out of stone, I think it's ridiculous. I think that they're more likely victims of some cataclysm, and that they were buildings at one time. Wakey, Wise Up, they've both covered that in their videos, and I think they have a lot of interesting things to say. But as far as the pareidolia goes, I think people who are more right-brained, artistic-minded, they have this ability to see patterns in things, and I've always had that ability myself. I produce artwork that's very abstract, and oftentimes faces jump out at me. I can see faces everywhere if I want to, and I really didn't want to do that when I started looking at this mountain, because if I were to start to report that the things I was finding were actually true, then a lot of people might think I was a fool if I was not careful. Gotcha. I know. That can have devastating effects on them as well.
Yeah, I think pareidolia, it's almost a form of divination if you open yourself up to it. You can interact with the cosmos through what you're focusing on, and then what you look at and what you see. It's like, the Tarot or the I Ching or something. It's like taking a snapshot of the universe at a moment in time as it relates to you and your consciousness.
Yes. Yeah, I think the ones who are seeing this, they are enabling their transcendental higher self to see it. Ever since I was a child, I've always worked with a witnesser. Call it God, angels, whatever, transdimensional beings, but I've never been alone. Not that I, think that there's an angel right there walking with me everywhere I go, which there are anyway, but I don't sort of operate from that basis. I do operate as, on my own universe, in the universe, but I know and am aware of transdimensional beings around me all the time. But what I mean is that in most of my daily dealings, I'm always watching myself. I don't just go about carrying out my duties and patterns of behaviour without checking them and seeing that I'm doing it correctly. And I just like looking at myself from the third perspective, and that witness is always there. You just have to tap into that energy. So when people start enabling that, then they start seeing this, and then numbers as well start becoming a part of their lives, whereas those numbers were always there. It's just that now that you're synchronizing and syncretizing, those two words always go together, really. So synchronizing would be synchronizing events with time and catching the clock when it clicks over to 1111 or whatever numbers you're constantly seeing. They were always happening and they're always in the background. It's just that now that our consciousness is growing, we can now notice more. Paying attention is how you do syncretism. That's what I say to people. You don't have to be a genius and you don't have to have any PhDs. You just need to pay attention. And I always have. Whenever I've studied the Bible or anything, I just pay attention and make things sink deep into my heart and give them some kind of a significance. So I think that is happening. We're enabling that part of us that sees the conscious energy, slow or fast, through all forms.
Yeah, well, paying attention is definitely how this came about in the first place for me. You were talking about the Tartarian architecture, which goes hand in hand with mud flood, because so much of it is buried under mud, and that tied in for me into new ideas about things like mud fossils and rapid petrification. The idea that things could turn to stone very quickly. So that caused me to, I always have had a close contact with nature. I've always loved to hike and look at things around me. But my understanding of the nature of the physical world was based on a cosmological model that involved billions and billions of years, and that the rocks that I was seeing were formed under the sea floor by hundreds of millions of years of pressure and pushed up by tectonic plates, and that was where the rocks came from. So I never really examined them or pondered the idea that, wow, this might have formerly been a creature. And, I'm not not millions and millions of years ago and compressed, but actually in not so distant times. And because of my background as a chiropractor and my studies of anatomy and histology, which is the study of tissue, as I started to look at the rocks, I started to notice patterns, and what I thought was just a chance pattern that looked a lot like blood vessels, turned out on further examination to perhaps be that, but not just blood vessels of smaller creatures, blood vessels of very large creatures, and that was an unexpected discovery for me. I don't know how much of what you've said before I came in. I'm sorry to have missed the opening.
Well, I was just talking about how a friend of mine in Queensland took me to a town called Gympie, where we've got guys like Steve Young, who's doing the Egyptian hieroglyphs there in Gympie and the pyramids of Gympie. So I lived there. I lived around that area for 4 years, and I never went to Gympie. And she actually took me one day, and I filmed all the stones that have been reused all around town from the pyramid, and it's right hiding in under your nose, right there, the cheek of it. They pulled down the pyramids that were there in Australia, and as the Caliph did in the 12th century with the pyramids in Egypt, they pulled the casing stones off, and in this case they pulled the whole pyramid down because you can't find any of the rocks, but you'll see them strewn across the countryside everywhere. You'll see these pyramid rocks everywhere around Gympie with strange markings on them, and these are supposedly well, they were there when the colonialists first turned up, so that would be thousands of years. And I went around Gympie everywhere and filmed all of the Tartarian buildings and how all of them were erected between, say, 1870 and 1889 kind of thing, and the same with Melbourne, Sydney, all the cities around Australia. All of the buildings go back to that decade. It's like all the builders in the universe turned up in Australia for that decade to build these amazing Romanesque and Grecian type buildings, which history tells us the convicts did, and it's just so ridiculous when you look at it. And there's also evidence in Melbourne and Sydney. I've seen multiple examples of evidence of mud floods all throughout the cities there.
Yeah, and I think Sydney, within 50 years of the settlers landing, had the largest railway system in the world at the time, or something. I mean, when you start to dig into the historical narrative for these different places, the world's fairs are just it's a treasure trove when it comes to this sort of stuff, because you find that they're just repeating the same stories over and over again of great fires, and it's like how all these buildings supposedly made of stone were destroyed by fire is beyond me. But the World's Fairs, I think, is really fascinating to look into, because the buildings are utterly incredible. And when you look at Chicago and San Francisco, and you realize that it's not just the architecture that's found all over Europe and all over other parts of the world, but even in places where it absolutely shouldn't be, it is. So.
Yeah, exactly. I always marvelled at Sydney and Melbourne. I used to go when I was a teenager just to wander in the streets and look at the great architecture. Just marvelled at the old buildings. I still do. It's just buildings I see faces in them. As I said, I see so much more. I just can sit in front of those old buildings in Melbourne forever and just look at them. They're so glorious. And I always wondered, how could it be? How could it be that Melbourne supposedly was founded by John Batman, in 1838? 1838. And then we've got the biggest tram, which you call trolley system, in the world, one of the biggest in Melbourne. So many trolleys all over the place in Melbourne, amazing buildings, and they looked so Romanesque, and I'm thinking to myself, how did the Australians have so much power that they could get all the Italian and French and German builders out to Australia in that decade to make all of those buildings? I just could not comprehend. And then they'd have these little old photograph display banners around that you could read, and they would tell you the history, and they would say, this General Post Office of Melbourne was built with, sandstone, which was quarried from this quarry 150 miles away, and the convicts were sent there to quarry this stone. And it's just ludicrous now when you think of it.
Those convicts must have been the best builders in England, because they sure did a great job. And how did England build anything after they left is what I wonder.
I know. And I used to work for a volume builder selling brand new homes in the 90s, and we often couldn't put chimneys in the houses because there weren't enough bricklayers who could do them properly. Can you believe that? And yet we've got thousands of examples of old so-called Victorian, Georgian and Edwardian homes all throughout the suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane and Hobart, everywhere with chimneys that were, from 150 years ago, and yet we don't have bricklayers who can make proper chimneys anymore.
They just don't build them like they used to.
Something just doesn't add up there. It just doesn't.
Have you looked into the star forts much? I mentioned them,
yes.
I think, briefly in that video that I made, but that's an incredibly fascinating topic because the narrative on that just falls apart, on the least bit of investigation as well. We're told they're bastion forts built between the 15 and 1700s, and instead of making castles like they used to, they'd started to make the walls far, far thicker and have this star shape for defense purposes, and it was all to make the walls thicker to defend against the invention of the cannon. And some of the people that I do research with have just utterly destroyed that, because not only are they going and looking at the old maps, which are showing, the star forts and their original plans to the star forts, and they're not just star forts, they're star citadels, they're entire cities, and what you find is that all of the old world cities were originally star forts, and that all of the Tartarian architecture and all of this other architecture that followed, that's built on and around the star forts. So the star forts were there first, and they're absolutely monumental in scale. But I think they've got one map that goes back to the 1100s with star forts on it. So everything about that narrative falls apart. But the most astonishing thing is how many of them there are. There are, so far, my friends have mapped out 5,000 star forts, and they're literally on every single continent. And they're in the most unlikely places that you wouldn't expect. Japan is just filled with them. They're all over Europe. They're on North America. They're in Africa, and it just doesn't add up when you look at what the wiki narrative is.
Yep. Well, when you have this researcher mentality that we have, searching for the truth, now your perspective changes. Now you see a lot better what was very difficult to swallow and to assimilate at school, doing things like history and history was see, I love history as a subject, but I don't love the fact that we know so little about it, and what we do is could be manipulated. Well, it is, and stuff like that. But everyone's kind of intrigued and interested in history and would like to know, and nothing has ever made sense. Nothing at all. Even the evolution stuff that they tried to make you swallow, and everything coming from nothing. There's a beautiful thing that they really demonise, the teaching that everything comes from nothing. No, everything comes from what is not seen, but it's not nothing. What is not seen is everything. So the Big Bang should be that, yes, everything comes from what seems to be nothing because it's invisible, but it's everything. You see, so rather than teaching this hogwash that all of this you just came out of nothing, a black hole, and it was nothing, and everything came out of that, they should be teaching the truth, that everything came from what is invisible, but what is invisible is everything. Therefore, it came from everything. There's only a universe of no vacuums, no space as we know it, really, because even though it's space, it's still a fullness. It's a oneness. Manly P. Hall addressed this as well. How the cosmos is like this. There's nothing that is empty. You see, so it's a fullness of everything. And so now we have, I think, one of the best truths to ever come out is this Tartarian truth, the mud floods, and what you're bringing out there, Mike. This is one of the best things because now everything makes sense a lot more, and it's all exposed, really.
Yeah, I think what we're calling history is mythology, and our mythology is our true history. That's the conclusion that I'm coming to, because so much of history is a lie, and I can't remember who said it, but a set of lies agreed upon, or his story, and I when I was younger, I didn't care for history at all. It just seemed like battle after battle, and monarch after monarch, and horrible, devastation, and so I was always looking towards the future, and I was a big, space lover and sci-fi and Star Trek and Star Wars and all the fantasy stuff I loved. But as I got into my teens and early 20s, I was big into books on quantum physics, and my parents, I came from a very alternative background. I grew up in Southern California, and so I grew up with Eastern spirituality and astrology and the Tarot and the I Ching, and my mom was a book buyer for a New Age bookstore. So I had a very different mentality than a lot of my peers, and but nevertheless, I was always looking towards the future because I was hoping everything was going to be better, and never realized that the past might have been far more fantastic and beautiful and amazing than we were led to believe, or that there was a time when maybe the technology was actually working in harmony with nature and was far more sophisticated than what we see now, and that people were not paying for energy but had it for free, and were working in harmony with one another. I mean, that's what it seems to be the case. I don't know, maybe there was slavery back there, but there was a lot of beauty that was being created as well, and it still remains to this day. And it's just that they've lied to us about who built it and how long it's been around, and what its purpose was, and they've removed the different technologies that the buildings probably were. They were generating energy. They were doing God knows what. we can only guess at this point.
Well, I think two things fundamentally: consciousness expanding and healing, and really those two. It's like they are two different things, but they are one, as you would say in theology, like I and the Father are one. So in other words, like fire is always next to heat and light. They are separate things, but you can't have fire without heat. You can't have fire without light. So, they come together, wouldn't you say? They are two things that, healing, obviously the Egyptians were always bringing people, they were like hospitals, astrological type, where healing would be done just by moving people through certain parts of the building to get a certain frequency. So the building would be set to, let's say, an F sharp, like the tombs chamber in the Great Pyramid, and then they would have everything else tuned to harmonics thereof, and they would bring people through an initiation, which would be like a healing.
Yeah.
And then consciousness would be as well, the other side of that, as well as, because when you go into these buildings, I've been through a few. I've been to the York Minster, Salisbury, Glastonbury Cathedral, Salisbury. I've been to the Vatican, and I've spent some time just noticing, how I feel as well. And you do feel more noble and elevated in consciousness. The consciousness now becomes, you see these big buildings, this big architecture, and it's like a god around you, encasing you. It has its own consciousness, and you come into it and you have more grace and you have more glory. It's a glorious place to be, and so everything gets altered in you. So I would say consciousness and healing.
Definitely, the buildings are encoding all of the different, sacred geometry aspects and their resonance chambers. The organs themselves, may have been. Who knows what the organs were capable of when the buildings were fully functioning, but also the voices as well. I mean, I've been inside of buildings where just a small amount of tone, is enough to set up a vibration in the place that echoes through the whole place. So those buildings are amazing. And Barbara asked the question of, what are the meanings of the star forts? And the star forts, they look a lot like cymatic patterns. So they themselves may have been emanating energies, and they would most likely used for communications. Victor, he has a channel called the Boogeyman, Buggeman, and he's found pictures in old books that show that the star forts were actually used for communication purposes as well. So there, I think some hypothesize that they were also potentially the source of the mud floods, that they were used for mining and all kinds of different things. But I think you're definitely right when it comes to these cathedrals and the mosques. These are structures that are far more than just pretty buildings. They yeah.
Yeah, so do you think perhaps a higher order of buildings was destroyed as the great trees were destroyed, and to create some of these, mountain ranges and mountains that look like the gods, they look like, titans, would you say?
Well, okay, sorry, can you ask the question one more time? I got distracted there for a moment.
I'm just wondering how others are saying as well that these mountains that look like the Titans and that were also buildings. Do you think they destroyed a higher order of buildings, the like of which we don't have, like really big, massive building?
It's possible. I mean, there's one channel that came out recently criticizing the work that I've done, saying that I'm suffering from pareidolia, and what that mountain actually is a giant building that was melted. And there are lots of examples of that around the world. There's places like Cappadocia and the Lalibela churches and Petra and these different places where it looks like there was some kind of a cosmological warfare, because obviously fire doesn't melt stone like that unless, it's some kind of a, whether it's, I no longer believe in nuclear weapons as they tell us, but, something just melted a ton of stuff. And whether it was just in certain parts of the world and other buildings remained, or whether it was, damage to an earlier wave of structures that were on a grander scale, I don't know. That seems plausible. But what I can say about this mountain is it was not a building, and there's far too many specific anatomical features that I've found that match up perfectly. It may not be an elephant as I portray it in the videos, but it's definitely a vertebrate. There's definitely an eye. There's an ear. And there's far too much that corresponds when it comes to the tissues of the mountain with it. They're exactly where they should be, and they are what they should be. And I specifically didn't want to suffer from pareidolia when I started this investigation. When I first got onto the idea that, wait a minute, maybe this might actually be what it appears to be, because I'd been always looking at the mountain with fondness, because I love the fact that it looked like an elephant, and that there was a cave exactly where the eye should be, and that the head was shaped right and everything. But I never thought for a second it might be. So that idea would have been absurd to me 2.5, 3 years ago. So when I started to wake up the possibility that it might be so, that was when I said, okay, wait a minute, I've got to take a step back, and I'm not looking at clouds here. I need to approach this using the scientific method. And so I hypothesized that, okay, if it was really a fallen Titan, and that eye is actually an eye, then I should be able to go up there with a list of specific things that I would expect to find before I go. And that's what I did. And that visit to the cave after that hypothesis was mind-blowing, because I found some very, very specific things, and I lay those out in the second video of the Unveiling a Titan series. And then those discoveries just came one after the other. And we were talking at the very beginning of the conversation about synchronicity. There have been so many synchronicities that have come in relationship to this research that I'm constantly being nudged along the path, so to speak. And so I don't think for a second this mountain is one of those ancient gigantic structures, but I definitely believe that there are many of those around the world.
Yeah, and the channel that posted that video about you as well, I research his channel as well, and that's Jerry DeCamp. So I'm going to be interviewing him in a couple of weeks here as well. So for the listeners, we're going to be also talking about the other side of, or the building side of these massive mountains and other things that we see that have the amazing titanic energy in them. So that will be in a couple of weeks as well. But I see both arguments as being plausible. Mike, I do. I see that the buildings there as well in some of them, but not in all cases. And then in other cases, I see it to be the Titanic spirit.
I think people get blinders on, and they get an idea and they find evidence for their idea, and then they think that that's the only thing. And were they buildings? Were they Titans? Were they, were the plateaus Avatar-like trees? Were they tendons? You get all these different camps of beliefs, and I think more likely, it's probably all of the above or several of the above. And it's the same thing with Earth shape. Is it a sphere? Is it flat? Is it hollow? Maybe it's all three. Maybe it's, I saw a video you were talking about, the toroid shapes of the electromagnetic aspects of our world. And I think people need to be a little less narrow-minded and more open to everything. Doesn't mean you have to believe it all, but don't just lock yourself in on one thing.
Yep, that's right. Know things. Don't go around believing things. Go around knowing things. Even if someone has a totally wrong point of view on things, they can still reveal a little bit of truth. For instance, a colorblind man, he might not be able to tell you the color of the car that hit a pedestrian and ran off, but he might be able to tell you, the number plate or the make and model of the car, and whether it was going west, east, or north, or south. Whereas, so you're always going to benefit from knowing things, even if what you know is incorrect, because that will be an information base for you to compare another point of view against. Now, this is the thing with a lot of people, is that they believe a model, they don't know anything about it, and they can't even defend their own model or their own science or anything like that, because too much belief has come in. And like you said, they'll get blinkers then, and then all of a sudden there's no Titans, there's only buildings, or there's no buildings at all, or whatever. And it's interesting how that happens. You get some researchers, they go off on a tangent and they, become really good at it. And so that's great, because whatever they discover, right or wrong, will add to the pool of what we know. And that's what Wikipedia is like. I guess someone jumps in and writes an article, and then other people are invited to improve it and modify it, etc. And so it's a pool now. It's not a single linear individual stream of something. And everybody's now. It's like multiplicative knowledge base rather than additive. It's it makes things just so much better when we approach things from that mode. For instance, astrology. A lot of people would cringe that we're both astrologers and have lived it all of our most of our lives, and we understand it, because they think you have to believe in astrology, whereas no, it's an exact science. We're dealing in degrees, minutes and seconds of arc, and that's pretty precise if you ask me. Therefore, it is a science. It's got nothing to do with beliefs. The same with music. There's a science to it, but you don't have to believe in music to know music. I know music. I can play the guitar. I don't believe in it, and I can speak Italian. I don't believe in Italian. I just know it, and I'm expressing English, which is a language I don't believe in either, but I do know it. And none of these. Yeah, and so having that approach is best, Mike. I've had it all the time, even when I was a Jehovah's Witness, very zealous, knocking on people's doors, converting them to the true and only religion which will save them. I would still listen to the Muslims and the Jews and the Pentecostals and everyone else who had an opinion and a belief, and I would be talking to them probably, if you go by party rule, the party line of the Jehovah's Witnesses, more than I should have. I got reproved many times as well. Oh brother, you shouldn't be talking so much with the Jews. They like to convert you. If you're not talking, you're not converting. So lift it up. Lift your game. And I used to get the elders sort of making remarks and noting that I was very open-minded with certain, different. Well, that's what got me to where I am, just to keep the mind open and open and open. I didn't believe any of what they said, but I wanted to know what the Hindu gods were like, and who is Brahma, and how does he relate to Vishnu and Shiva and Krishna. And, oh yes, and I would go down that path with them and enjoy it, And the sister or the brother that was with me, I could feel them cringing, So.
Well, it's been interesting for me. I don't know if you saw it, but I did an interview with SGT Report a little over a week ago, and he's a Bible believer. He's a Christian, and he has a huge following. And that interview was seen by a lot of people, and my channel literally doubled within a few days as far as the number of subscribers that were there, and most of them were very much Bible-believing Christians, and I've had some wonderful conversations with them in the comment threads, and it's nice that they're so open-minded. But it's also been a surprise to me that the things that I've been finding are actually offering some sort of scientific validation or confirmation for their beliefs and their faith and these ancient texts are actually being confirmed in a roundabout way by the things that I'm finding and I'm presenting. So that's been a fascinating dynamic. I've come from a very, very different background, and now I'm far more open to these other ideas than I ever was before. But what I think we all share, the people who are interested in these this list of different topics that we've already touched on, is that we're all open-minded. We're all of the mind that the majority of the mainstream narratives that we're being fed are either out and out lies or half-truths, and so we're out digging around trying to find out what the truth is. So we're all independent researchers, really. And the problem with independent research is that as you start to dig into things just a little bit, then you get to this point that, the Dunning-Kruger effect is describing this of, just enough about something to get yourself into trouble because all of a sudden you think you know everything and you're extremely excited about that. And I think that's happening to a lot of people, and then they jump on a bandwagon and, it's like Crow says that belief is the enemy of knowing. So I think, the intention has to be to test all things and to come at things, with the pure intention of trying to find the truth. And when it comes to things like astrology, it's all about intention. I mean, when it comes to these sorts of things, a lot of the Christians are they're going to be saying, oh, this is the devil's work and you're supposed to stay away from it and all of these things. But what are you doing with astrology? You're just observing the cosmos. You're looking at the constellations and the wandering stars, and you're trying to understand what those things are, what is creation, and what is my relationship to it. And so I think it's really important that people remain open-minded, but they also keep their rationality, and they test things. They don't just dive into everything with only belief. We need to have a balance between belief and looking at the empirical evidence.
Yeah, too good. I'm into that big time. All right, Mike, let's go to a break. We're at the top of the hour, so we'll in the next hour, I guess we can address some of the questions there in the chat box if there are any. I think there was. Or let's get into the meat of some of your videos and some of the big finds. Let's make it really, really exciting for first-time listeners on this subject, and so they can go to your videos, how to get them, which ones to watch, what they'll learn, etc. So we'll be back in a few minutes, guys. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Hello, folks. This is Jordan Maxwell. It's a pleasure, again, to be able to talk with you, and I've been trying to wake people up to the facts of life that's going on the earth today. And this is what I'm known for. This is what I love doing, is trying to teach people and educate them. I have a piece of knowledge that you need to know about. There is a radio operation going on called People for People Radio, and I am delighted that I have been able to be on the People for People Radio, and I want to invite all of you to go to People for People Radio. Go on the web and find it and follow all the programs on People to People Radio. Fascinating stuff, I tell you. And thank you for hearing me. Bye-bye.
Hi, this is Lizzie with Love Bubble, sharing my journey and speaking of healing energies, spirituality and awareness, bringing to the table insights of whom we truly are. Lizzie Love Bubble, 11 p.m. UK, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, every Monday on peopleforpeople.ning.com. Be with us every Monday. See you there.
Hey, and I'm Patty. Tune in Monday, 9 p.m. UK and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to People for People Radio, to the Turtle and Crow Show.
For an exciting, unique perspective on social and world events.
See you there.
It's Ouija here. Tune into my show on Fridays, 9 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. Central time, and 4 p.m. Eastern time on People for People Radio. See you there, folks.
This is Yolene Slee from Nourishing Peace show on People for People Radio. I've been out on winter break, and I'm really excited to announce that I'll be back for my show on Sunday, January 26th. That's at noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time, and 8 p.m. UK time. My passion in this show is traditional foods, Chinese medicine, and simple, healthy living skills. Food is how we physically and spiritually nourish ourselves. And so we're going to be back just in time for the Chinese New Year's, and we're going to be talking about the Year of the Rat and some really interesting things about becoming healthy and whole in this upcoming new year.
Also,
not only more about gel coat.
When the fourth round would...
Don't you call in the... More importantly, he knew what he was talking about.
oh, does it look good already? Okay.
Jumbo Scampi for limited...
All for a price that will make you...
How the hell am I supposed to pay?
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to People for People Radio, the voice of truth in Scotland.
Welcome back, folks. So continuing on from where we left off, we're going to be probably discussing some examples, some standout examples that might be inspiring for any of the listeners who want to do further research. So, Mike, do you want to tackle it from that angle? And what's your YouTube channel so folks can go to it while you're talking?
The YouTube channel is called Stellium7. It's spelled Stellium as in Mike, and then the number 7 without a space. And yeah, it's not a lot of videos up there, but they're packed with a lot of information.
Yeah, nice. All right, so you want to deal with some of those good examples? I just noticed that someone posted something about 15 star-shaped forts from around the world in the PBS. Are you in the PFP chat room? Are you in that chat room?
I'm in the Skype chat room, but I don't know where the PFP chat room is.
All right, I'm going to send those to you directly in your chat, so perhaps you can look at those and maybe make a comment on that. There you go. Have a look at that one. And do you know any of those?
I didn't get it. Where did you send it?
In your Skype, in your personal one.
Personal one. Hold on one second. I don't see
So while you're looking for that...
There we go. Okay, found it. So 15 star-shaped forts around the world. And what was the question?
Well, do you know any of those? Look at them. I mean, look at the pictures. They're incredible.
Yeah, and these are tiny compared to the larger ones. These are smaller stars, and then there's a couple there that have towns in the center of them. But what people don't understand is that cities like Amsterdam, Antwerp, Paris, pretty much all of the major cities in Europe, even some of the smaller and mid-sized towns, these are all built on and around star forts. And I had been in many of them without ever realizing what they were. And once I started to learn about this, it was incredibly fascinating. And that was ultimately one of the things that led to my discoveries about the mountain. There were a variety of different things that came simultaneously. One was the mud floods, the mud fossils, the idea of rapid petrification, Tartaria, the star forts, and all of those ideas were bouncing around in my head. And then finally I saw some videos covering the topic of Titans, and that was really when the penny dropped, and I realized, wait a minute, maybe Titans really did exist, and there are some pictures that are going around that are amazing of an island in Hawaii that looks exactly like an elephant from multiple angles. That's the thing, is a lot of the people who get into the whole thing with Titans and these topics, they really get wrapped up in what may be pareidolia, where they're looking at something from a particular angle and the shadows are hitting it just right, and it looks like a face or it looks like an animal, and so then they're claiming that it is that. Whereas if you looked at it from several other angles, it might look nothing like what they're claiming it is. So it's really important that people make sure that if they're going to start to present information, that they're looking at things from a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different angles, and then they're actually doing on the ground research. And that was what I did with the mountain. I've spent almost 2 years studying it, and so far I've accumulated 50 different specific anatomical correlations that are the overall morphology of the mountain, and also the just down to the tissues inside the eye socket, the places where the bones would meet in the eye socket, like the socket of an eye in all of the vertebrates is made of a number of bones that all meet in places called sutures. So that was the kind of thing that I was doing before I went out making any claims or even making videos, is trying to get all the ducks in a row, because there's a ton of stuff out there. A lot of it is also photoshopped, and it just makes people look foolish because they're making these outlandish claims, but there's no substance behind it. So that's kind of, that's why I've approached things the way I have.
Yeah, well done. Well,
someone asks if there's star forts in Scotland, and I would say that there's star forts everywhere. In the Petrified Titans video, I think I've got a little video clip of me zooming out on Google Earth, and you can see all the stars that have been mapped by my friends. And if there weren't star forts in Scotland, I would be very surprised.
Yep.
So you wanted me to talk a little bit about the different findings, or how I've come about it, or give me. Yeah. There's so much material to cover, and we don't have that much time. So maybe if you can just kind of nudge me in a direction.
Yeah, your best findings, and I say hit it home for your listeners. What's the greatest treasures that you've come away with your research?
Okay, so I'll just cover it very generally. So the mountain itself, if you go on Google Earth and you scan around, the mountain has a lot of different morphological characteristics that match that of an elephant. So the shape is elephant shape, and that includes a head, an eye, the cutouts for the two sides where the head would meet the neck. The rib cage is clearly defined there. You can see on both sides of the mountain that the traces of ribs. There's a deep canyon that goes up between where the legs would be, and there's even an ear. And so after going up and studying the eye in depth, I started to consider that maybe there would be an ear. Now, a lot of people have asked me, when they look at the mountain, first of all, if you go in on Google Earth and you scan around in 3D, you got to make sure that 3D buildings are turned on. Otherwise, it's just going to look like a blob, because it's got incredible detail, but you have to have the 3D buildings turned on. The other thing is that after I'd put out the first 4 videos in the series, somebody at Google Earth went in and edited the mountain. And they actually blocked out the eye and they blocked out the ear. It's absolutely amazing. But I show that in the 5th video, that I show the before and afters of all of the different footage that I'd gotten from Google Earth and how it looks now. And the changes that they made it so that you can still see the detail, but you have to get it right next to the mountain, and then literally the eye will open up, and what's been smeared away and blocked out slowly fades away. But as soon as you back up to try and get a bigger picture and see how these different anatomical features relate to the rest of the mountain, then it blocks off again. So I show that in the 5th video of the series. But, before, for the first year and a half that I was studying it, I could just zoom around from all kinds of different angles, and it was amazing how many different characteristics matched that of an elephant, just looking at it from the big picture. And so that was when I went to my anatomy books and looked at 3D modeling on different channels or different websites, just to bone up on the anatomy before I went back to the eye. The other side of the mountain doesn't have an eye or an ear, and people say, well, why, if it's an elephant, why doesn't it? And that whole section of the front left side of the mountain has collapsed, and there's been a geological survey that's done by mainstream geology where they talk about that portion of the mountain, and they call it a synclinal, which synclinal means that the layers of strata have collapsed downward. So there was a violent collapse on that portion of the mountain, and you can see the remnants of all of the fragmented rock that are almost like a river going down from that portion of the mountain. So where the left eye and the left ear would be, that portion of the mountain has collapsed. But after going to the eye and discovering, it was 10 or 12 different, very, very specific anatomical features, and I cover that in the 2nd video in the series. After discovering that, I started to think, well, maybe there's an ear. And that I went back online, and I'm looking at and that section of the mountain where there should be an ear if it really was an elephant. There's a quarter moon change in color exactly where an ear would have attached, which was just an amazing coincidence. And so I decided I was going to go up and take a look up there and see if I could climb up and see if there were any caves, because the eye was very easy to get to because there's a trail, and I've got a lot of great footage from that. But the ear was a different thing, and so as I was looking for the information about like a trailhead that I could take or which road to take, I was looking online, and I found out that there was actually a cave there, and the cave is called Cova del Middia, which is the cave of midday, because a portion of the cave gets the sun, the midday sun comes right into the cave. And I didn't know anything about the cave until I went looking for it. And the interesting thing about that cave, which I knew nothing about until I was looking at this website, is that it is the most thoroughly excavated cave in all of Europe. was utterly mind-blowing. It was like I'd entered the Twilight Zone. And there had been a team of archaeologists who had gone into the cave. There were the remains of several bodies, which they excavated. There were cave paintings, and they went in with 3D mapping, and they did much of my work for me. I've never had the opportunity to go into the cave because you need climbing equipment. The cave is located at 375 meters, so what is that, about 800 feet altitude, or no, more than that, 1,200 feet altitude.
What's the town surrounding it called?
There are two towns that flank the mountain. On one side, on the right side of the mountain, it's a town called Javea, which is spelled Javea, and then on the other side of the town is a town called Denia, Denia. And interestingly enough, there's a star fort at Denia that's right next to the mountain, and so it's a fascinating place. So as I looked into the ear more closely, it got very, very wild, because the 3D mapping they did made it possible for me to see exactly what direction the channels of the cave were going, and they actually had video footage of people climbing through the cave, and so I was able to actually take that work that they had done and start comparing that to anatomy, and that's what I do in the third video. And then the fourth video really covers the histology of the mountain. And histology is the medical term for tissues. So it's the breakdown of all the different kinds of rock that are found around the mountain, and how those correspond to the kinds of tissue that you would expect to find in the exact same places. And so it's a thorough forensic analysis. I go from the bottom to the top of the mountain. I'm inside the deep into the caves of the eye, and then the footage that the archaeologists have from the ear as well is there. So, by the time I had finished with a lot of this research, I was already up to 40 specific anatomical correlations, and those are all shown with photographs and video in the first 4 videos that I did. And then in the 5th video, when I covered the Google Earth censorship, that was an amazing happening as well, because it was a total synchronicity. I took a couple of friends up there. One of them is Victor Buge, whose channel I mentioned earlier, and Andreas Exirtus, who's another YouTuber. He's got a channel called Andreas Exirtus, Xirtus, and they came to visit because they wanted to see the mountain, and I took them up into the cave, and you can actually go deep back into the channels of the cave, and there's this portion where we crawled through. It's about 5 meters through a hole that you have to go through either on your butt or on your stomach just to get through, and then that opens up into a large cavern. And that matches also the anatomy of the sinus passages that are just below and behind the eye socket. But when we were leaving from that trip, the two of them looked at this section of rock that sits up high in the middle of the eye, and said, "Wow, look at this crystalline structure. It covers this whole rock." And when he saw that, the light bulb went off in my head, because I had looked at it before and I had thought, wow, maybe that's the remains of the eyeball itself. But I was, how would I know that? And when he spotted this crystalline structure, I looked more closely at it, and it lined up, and I show it in the video, in the 5th video, and show all of the different correlations to eyeball anatomy, and there are channels that go in for the blood vessels, and so it's been a truly fascinating exploration. But those are kind of the main points of the findings, and the 4th video covers the tissue in detail, and there are a lot of different kinds of tissues that I've identified, and they match perfectly with what should be exactly where I'm finding them.
Yeah, I'm watching the first part as you're speaking, and I'm looking at the mountain. Did you say it was in Sarajevo?
No, it's in Spain, on the Costa Blanca.
Oh, right. Okay, so, wow. And which region is that in?
It's basically between Valencia and Alicante.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, both of which are star citadels, both of those cities.
Yeah, and so you spent a lot of time in there. Oh, there's the ear thing you were talking about.
Yeah, I have a little 90-second, for people who are just listening to what we're saying, if they want to have some visuals for what we're talking about, there's a little, on my channel, there's a little 90-second teaser video that's it's got music, but there's no talking. It's just visuals, so they can get a taste of it. But there's a whole other kind of half of my YouTube channel that doesn't center around the mountain, but is directly related to it, because as I said before, this really caused me to start looking at geology with very different eyes and realizing that much, if not most, of the geology that I was used to looking at throughout my life was actually biogeology. Now, you know, volcanoes you can watch volcanoes in the process of producing different kinds of igneous rock. But when it comes to all of the other stories about metamorphic rock and sedimentary rock that we're told, we just kind of have to believe the mainstream narrative on that unless you're going to depart from that. Now, there is plenty of evidence that flies in the face of a lot of the cornerstones of mainstream geology and the different methods that they're using for dating. And a lot of those are coming from the biblical creationist side of things, but they're basically using science to debunk the different techniques that are supposedly used. So already you can find a lot of information that conflicts with the narratives we're told about these different layers of rock being formed over hundreds of millions of years. And there are a lot of anomalies, like trees growing up through multiple layers of strata and you know, coal, for example, that can be produced from tree. If you put coal in a pressurized container and you cook it for a couple of weeks, you don't even have to cook it at that great of a heat. It will turn to coal. So a lot of the stories that we're told about the formation of rock, I think, are either just out and out lies or mistakes made by people who were believing a paradigm that wasn't accurate, and so they're trying to fit everything that they're observing into this inaccurate paradigm. But what the other things that I cover on my channel have to do with what I've identified as petrified organs. And as a result of looking at the stones differently and walking around and observing nature with entirely different eyes and looking at a rock, and instead of just seeing a rock and assuming that it was formed the way we're taught, looking at a rock and wondering, like, is that something beyond just a rock? And I started to notice. Well, it started initially with one rock that I found in a river bottom. That when I picked it up, it was obvious to me that this was a stone heart. There were a number of anatomical features that matched the heart anatomy, and that's something that I cover in a video called "Mud Fossils: The Heart of the Matter."
Wow.
Somebody in the chat is asking if the elephant is older than the dinosaur Mesozoic, I don't even know how to pronounce the word, era. And first of all, I'm not convinced that dinosaurs even existed. I think there's plenty of evidence for dragons in our mythological record and you know, the history of many of the civilizations around the world. But the dinosaur narrative, that's one to look into. That's another rabbit hole that I'll let the person questioning explore. Someone asks if we can take a caller. I'm fine with that.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know how that's going to work. Gary would have to organise that. I haven't done one before, so I think we're just going to have to stick with the questions, I believe.
Yeah.
But might be wrong.
So going back to the heartstone that I found, I brought that home because I immediately recognized half a dozen different anatomical features, and so I brought it home and I pulled out the anatomy books and I started looking more closely at what I was finding, and within a pretty short amount of time I had found about 15 different anatomical features that matched heart anatomy. And the thing about it is the more specific features you find, and it's the same with the mountain, the less likely it is that you're suffering from pareidolia, right? You have to at some point start to weigh the odds of finding a rock that for example, I was finding the openings to the ventricles, the opening to the aorta, the coronary artery opening, and what's known as the coronary sulcus, which is where the coronary artery lies as it wraps around the heart. The fatty marbling was there. The color was the color of flesh. It had an outer white layer that if you saw the light, the layer ground away, underneath it was red. And so that outer layer is the fascial sac of the heart. And I even got an endoscopic camera to start to look inside, and there were chambers inside that also had anatomical features that matched a heart as well. So that was an unbelievable find, and you can see the video Mud Fossils, the Heart of the Matter, where I show it. But then I theorized that this should be reproducible. It shouldn't just be a one-off occurrence where I can find one heart, and if it's a phenomenon, then I should be able to find others. And so I went down with a video camera to the river bottom again, and in the space of about 15 minutes found another 10 or 12 that were potential candidates, that several of them had very specific anatomical features. So then I started to collect more and more of them and categorize them by theme. And those are the kinds of things that I've covered in the different videos that I've done on the petrified organs. And it was a very puzzling find, because the question of, I've had many people ask me, where's the rest of the body? Where's the head? Where's the spine? Where are the ribs, the long bones? And initially I didn't have an answer for that, but I wasn't just going to toss the rocks away and say, no, can't be what they appear to be, because I am not finding anything else, and I don't have a theory that can explain what I'm finding. So it took a lot of research to get to the point where I had some kind of a plausible explanation.
And what is the plausible explanation? How would you?
Well, it ties in with my explanations that have to do with the mountain as well. So, first of all, if you're going to consider mythology or religious texts as potentially being our real history, then you can't throw them out. So it could be as simple as some kind of a biblical event. It could be something like some ancient warfare that is the same kind of thing that wiped out these buildings that we were talking about earlier, and melted stone. So those are narratives that I'll touch on towards the end of the video that I'm working on now. But I wanted to stick to mainstream geology and see if I could find explanations for what I was finding. And mud floods was a potential explanation for the fossilization of flesh happening in short periods of time, because the mud itself is what's known as anaerobic. There's no air in mud, so all the worms and the microbes that would normally eat away at the flesh and cause it to decay are not present. So the flesh just sits there, and then over periods of time, the gases and the fluids and different substances within the flesh work their way out, and the minerals in the surrounding mud work their way in. That's a process known as paramineralization. That's not a wacko conspiracy theory. It's what mainstream geology says leads to the fossilization process. But they tell us it happens over millions of years, and we know that there are, for example, petrified trees. We know that there are different examples in geology that that we can point to of biology becoming rock, not just through compression, but actually undergoing a transformation process. So that still didn't explain why there were no bodies. Why would I just find organs? Because it wasn't just hearts I was finding. I was finding other organs as well, but for the sake of clarity in the videos and not wanting to confuse people or have people think I was a total lunatic, I focused on the hearts in the videos because the hearts have very specific anatomical features, and even though they vary greatly from species to species in their overall shape and form and size, they all have common themes running through them. They're hearts. They have certain openings. They have certain chambers. So it was a lot easier to show people what I was seeing and recognizing by sticking to those. But other organs like kidneys and spleens, and they're there as well. If you have a rock that looks like a disc or a rock that's kidney shaped, and you start claiming that that's what it is, well, you're going to seem a little crazy to people. But the theory that I'm working on now to explain why just organs and why not the rest of the body is that whatever caused the organs to petrify probably happened in a very cataclysmic way. And I believe that if we're not going to go to biblical narratives and something like the glittering sword, the hand of God reaching down and turning everything to stone, or ancient mythological stories like the Medusa, the Gorgons, turning things to stone just by looking at them, if we're going to stick with mainstream geology, then we have a number of different things that we can point to. One is something known as a lahar, and a lahar is basically an avalanche of heated ash mixed with water that's ejected from volcanoes, and that can cover huge amounts of areas. If people want to see examples of that, they can go to the Petrified Titans and Organs video. I show some pictures overhead of Mount St. Helens and how that eruption looked from the air after the eruption occurred. And so then what you're getting is heat and a tremendous amount of pressure. If you take bone and you put it into a crock pot, which is a pressurized, heated environment, within a few hours that bone is going to turn to sponge. Some people do that in order to make bone broth so they can drink it. And so I'm hypothesizing that whatever is destroying the outer portion of the body is involving a lot of pressure and a lot of heat, and that in the process of destroying the outer portions of the body, the internal organs are literally being baked like a hard-boiled egg, because each and every one of them is contained in their own individual fatty sacs, and then they're floating in the fluid of the chest and the abdominal chambers. So I think that as the outer portions of the body are being destroyed, inside those organs are being superheated, and so this process, it could conceivably happen in hours, maybe even minutes. It's something that could happen very, very quickly. And there are examples in mainstream geology of this sort of a thing happening. There are examples of crabs that are contained within these spherical balls. I can't remember exactly what they're called, but Mungo Jup of the Thunderbolts project has a video that's very interesting on instant petrification, and that ties into other theories that have to do with plasma, and if we're inside of a toroidal field or the Earth's electromagnetic poles are shifting, and there's a lot of different potential explanations. But that's the theory that I'm working on. I'm going to be presenting in the video I'm working on now.
So the size of this heart that you found, what was the size of it?
So the one that's in the first video that I did is 4 times the size of a human heart. So if you make a fist with your hand, that's more or less the size of your heart. And we have other animals like cows and giraffes and elephants they're far larger than we are. So that would explain the larger hearts. But there's also the whole giant narrative, which is very interesting as well, because there's so much evidence, photographic evidence of giants, mythological. It's in the books. There's no doubt there were giants, and the Smithsonian has likely been scurrying away their skeletons for many decades in order to keep their narrative.
Yep, for sure.
So I have one in my office that I use sometimes as a footstool. It's a 1.5 feet long. It has the exact same features that I show in the first videos. It's got the openings for the ventricles. It has the aorta. It dips in on the sides. They're shaped like harps very often, because the heart itself goes into contraction upon death, because energy is needed to relax the heart, not to contract it. As the energy is gone and the being dies, the heart goes into contraction, and as it does that, the main pumping portions of the heart, the ventricles, they actually curve inward because of the contraction. So I've found loads of these, all the way from a centimeter in size up to multiple feet, that exhibit the exact same characteristics. And you just have to start to ask yourself, once you've seen all of that empirical evidence that I presented, is this just a chance happening, or is this a very, very specific, repeatable pattern? And I show a list of criteria. It's up to 20 now on that first rock. And people can use that criteria. They can go out looking for these rocks themselves, and if they find them, they can start to study the anatomy themselves and look at that list. And I've had many people sending me emails with photos, and a lot of people just spot them right away. I think it depends on where you are. They're not everywhere. And not all rocks are organs, obviously, because some are fragmented pieces of larger structures, perhaps titans. Others are volcanic in origin.
We're speaking about the same thing, Tartarians and Titans. Think about it.
Yeah. Titans, Tartans.
Tartarians, I see the word art in that. They were artisans. I see Tara, the goddess of the Irish. Tartaria, Aryans, the Aryans, Tartarians. I see...
Tartarus was considered hell.
That's right, where the Titans were cast down, because the Olympians cast them down off the mountain down into hell. So the Titans, Tartaria, you see, Tartary.
And anyone who thinks this is just crazy talk, do a Google search for an image search for Tartary, Tartary, and you'll find a load of maps that are delineating the empire of Tartary. And it's ironic, because we never hear anything about Tartary except for things like tartar sauce and tata, and the number of words that we use in our everyday language that are related to Tartary are very, very small. And yet this was the largest empire in recorded history. It dwarfs the Roman Empire, and it's easily provable. And the architecture is the same all over the world. And the star forts and the pyramids and the Tartarian architecture are everywhere. So, who made what and when, I don't know. But I do know that Tartary existed. It was huge. It was all over Asia, all over Europe, even in North and South America. There are old maps with Tartarian cities right around the time that Columbus was supposedly discovering the New World. Yeah, history is a set of lies agreed upon.
Well, tar is just another way of saying star. The TAR is actually torus field, and stars are torus fields. Everything is. So, atoms.
I just thought of the La Brea tar pits.
There you go. So this would be, if you just put an S in front of Tartarians, you get Star-Tarians. Really, well...
That's interesting.
Well, it is, because everything, they say we are children of the stars, right? You say we're all stardust. Well, this is why we have young stars, which we call youngsters, your sister, which could be a spin star, and she could be a superstar or a monster or a master or a fraudster. She could be a rock star. She could be a... They're all stars, right? So this is my way of seeing it. So through all nature, whatever plane you're talking about, whether it's the mental plane, which is air, or the emotional plane, which is water, or the sensual plane, which is earth, or the mystical plane, which is fire, it all is being. You know, it's all God, and it's all expansions of God. So it's a self-similar, fractal, holographic kind of universe where we are just in the image of God, and God is in the image of us.
Yeah, and it's probably warping back around on itself. That's the thing is, you know, the Titans as spoken of in the Book of Enoch, they actually give a measurement. It's measured 3,000 L's, which is roughly, I think, 1.5 or 1.75 miles in height, which matches more or less the size of this mountain that I've been examining. But there are other people who are examining Titans that, you know, that seem plausible, that are, you know, on the scale of practically of continents, or, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles long. And I think that fits in with this idea of fractal, you know, universe, because if it's true that Titans existed, then there may have been even larger Titans before this elephant. It's hard to imagine them coexisting side by side. And each time people theorize that with each reset of this realm that we live in, that things are getting smaller and smaller, and that's how a fractal works. It contains the original pattern, but it gets smaller, and you just keep going in forever or out forever.
Well, this is what caused the Neoplatonists to declare that we are living in the mind of God. The universe is mind, and we are cells in God's mind, thinking. And so God's thoughts are the cosmos's thoughts. The cosmos would be the demiurge, of course, the dyad. And so in that cosmos, we are, as man is the measure of the universe, as the Egyptians said, well then man is, you know, that's the fractal, that's the archetypal shape that is repeating itself throughout the universe. And so, you know, sometimes it also is in the shape of a beast, and all kinds of beasts. The zodiac depicts that. And I believe that what the zodiac is it's just the unfurling, the ecliptic is the unfurling of a toroidal cycle, which Taurus and torso are the same word. So when you get a torso, it's a Taurus field. And so as that body in time expresses itself, all those 12 30-degree segments which make up the zodiac signs along the ecliptic, they all have their peculiar frequency, signature frequency. And the first 30 degrees of every cycle will have that archetype of the ram, Aries. And the second 30 degrees will be more solid. It will be the bull, Taurus. And in fact, that's how the zodiac goes. It starts at the top of the head, hence Aries rules the cerebrum, the cerebrum. Then the next sign is the cerebellum, Taurus. Then your two arms and your two lungs, that's Gemini, the twins. Then Cancer is the chest, and as you go down, Leo, the lion heart, Virgo, the belly, the kidneys to the two scales, Libra, Scorpio is the generative system, the Sagittarius is the hips from Hippo, Capricorn, the knees, Aquarius, the shins, and Pisces, the 2 feet, the 2 fish. So the temple it's there. That's the body of man along the ecliptic, and that is what's going on. Taurus fields unfurl themselves, and the energy is unfurled along the ecliptic, and the ecliptic then is extrapolated out of the Taurus field, and then from there all the truths and all knowledge comes from the ecliptic, which is the zodiac belt and the ecliptic of the sun and all the planets as they go around in the ecliptic. And that's what I do in my, what I call ecliptic science, in my videos. All of them, they all have the ecliptic. The path of the sun as it goes from the equator to the Tropic of Cancer, then back down to the Tropic of Capricorn. That sine wave there, that's it. That's the teacher. It's in your body. It's in every cell. It's in everything. It's in the DNA. I've done videos on this, countless videos on this, all how astrology is just pure science, and how these archetypal 12 Titans, that's what they were called, the signs of the zodiac, fighting against the 7 Olympians, the 7 visible planets, and these are warring with each other. So they are, that's how you will see gods in the mountains, in the clouds, if you pay attention. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fascinating, all of it. I used to look at astrology because I had this other cosmological view, and so I was trying to understand how could the planets actually have an impact on us. And so I was just thinking of, electromagnetic emanations, gravitational waves, that sort of thing. But it seemed so small, but it seemed like it was still something that you could conceivably measure in some way. But now I see it a lot differently. I see those as energetic beings that definitely do have an impact on us, and the natal chart as a spiritual fingerprint, so to speak, of the individual, and transits are a way to see what's happening in the present moment and how that relates to the individual. So when you talk about these correlations with the body, I'm just thinking of, as above, so below, and it seems to wrap back around on itself like a toroid also.
Well, if you think it's sound, okay, so the sun is making a sound, all is a tom. That's why the Book of Enoch says that the sun has a name. It has 2 names. One of them is Thomas, Tom. So, and the other one is Oarges. So now, Tom, all is atomic. You see, the sun is making a sound on the ecliptic. So when it hits the equator at March the 21st, it enters 0 degrees Aries. And why is the ram there? Well, because that's the frequency of the ovine, the lamb. To create in cymatics all these different shapes, all these different elaborate shapes, just by changing the frequency of sound. You can see this on a 2-dimensional plate. You imagine what the creator, Taurus fields, Kronos, Rhea, and Tor, their son, Jupiter, creator. Imagine working in 3 dimensions, what they can do with cymatics. So the first degrees of Aries is just a sound. It's a frequency. That's all it is. And then Taurus is a different frequency. The frequency of Aries is fire, cardinal fire. It's tuned. There are 12 tunings along any ecliptic. And fire is plasma. The next Taurus is solid. Then Gemini is of the gas frequency, and then Cancer is of the liquid. So you've got plasma, gas, liquid, and solid frequency universe, 4 solid states. And so, but it takes a certain frequency to create one of these 3-dimensional animals. A giraffe has a certain core frequency which will fit in. It'll come out of one of those 12, or a combination of 2 or more, but it will be one mostly. The canine frequency is of Aries and Libra. The equine is Sagittarius. The bovine is Taurus. But it doesn't mean to say, see, all the animals will fit and come from one of those, their frequency will resonate from one of those 12 sections, one of those 12
So
areas.
these are emanations from the Creator. First there was the Word, right? And
yes.
each one has a different. So cymatic patterns. I saw videos recently that were utterly amazing of somebody who had created a soap bubble and then ran sound through the soap bubble. You've probably seen Theoria Apophasis's videos with the magnets and the ferrocells and how you can see the toroidal field of the magnet in the ferrocell, which is incredible.
Oh, I'm one of Ken Wheeler's biggest fans. I've put more people onto Ken Wheeler than anyone else on the planet.
Right, and then there's a lot of videos showing music and different sound vibrations and how they affect fluid. But this guy created soap bubbles and put them on top of speakers, and he did it with multiple speakers as well. And then he's running different music and different vibrations and frequencies through these, and he's got LED lights that are illuminating the bubble. And basically you find everything that you can possibly imagine inside of these bubbles. That it's absolutely mind-blowing what this guy is doing, and I can't remember the channel name, but I'll try and find it later and give it so they can put it in show notes. But that's definitely something to check out.
Yes, so this is what I also have been teaching. The true model of the universe is atomic. All is atom. And you have to understand what the atom is. That's all you've got to do. You've just got to understand that it is a torus. It's a torus field. And as Ken Wheeler says, you cannot speak of toruses if you do not speak of their other half, the hyperbola.
Right.
And so I've extrapolated all my teachings from three words: atom, bol, which is the hyperbola, and so and the word tor, which is the torus field. And those are the three words of my Trinity, which are the three words which have generated all other words and all other forms in the universe. As the Egyptians said, all is atum. And so when you get bol and you transform that into bull, now you have toruses and bulls. Red shift, blue shift. That's what it is. And that's why you read the Bible and the Torah, you see, because all of our holy scriptures are talking. There you go again, talk, because when you talk, you create torsion fields through toruses. All energy, no matter what medium, thank you, Ken Wheeler, will have the same field modalities. Hence, everything will be torsos and torus fields. And everything is breathing. Breathing is Adam. It means Adam, and red shift. But breathing is Adam. Adam is the atom. All is atom. Hence you have an anatomy and a torso. And a Torah and aura which surrounds your body, and your torso is red shift, blue shift as well. Red chakra at the bottom, blue chakra on top. And so,
and then there's a very important third shape, because you talked about the hyperbole, right? Mm-hmm. The plane of inertia, the accretion disk in the center of it.
That's right, which in my model of the universe is the stationary plane, Ptolemaic Earth, and Stan Tenen in the Dance of the Hebrew Alphabet on YouTube, great Hebrew scholar. He uses an apple, and he opens up the apple, and then there's a disc inside the apple, and he says, well, this is the Garden of Eden, the disc Earth, and then the hyperbola in the center, he says, this is the tree of life. And so when you understand that atom, all is atom, then you'll understand that it means everything. It means the man, it means the sun, the universe, the planets. It also means the tree. Right? Because dendrites, which are in your brain, dendros is tree in Greek. So den in Japanese, denki, is electricity. And so when you look at these mountain ranges from on high, the topography is very much like the dendrites in your brain and the trees.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
Because the cerebellum, which is the densest, since you're talking about dendrites, the densest concentration of neurons in the brain, if you do a cross-section of that, it looks absolutely gorgeous, and that's known as the arbor vitae, which is the tree of life. So that's the cerebellum that has to do with our balance and the chunking of information so that we're able to do complex tasks without thinking about them. That's handled by the cerebellum.
Yes, exactly. The roots of the tree of life, which is the vagus pneumogastric nervous system, and they're all trees. Whether you are speaking about this, the cardiovascular system, that is a tree of life. Blue shift, red shift, blue blood, red blood, arteries and veins. And so the nervous system, again, another tree of life. The dendrites in the cerebrum, again, these are little trees. So Aden, or the garden, is actually the den of dendrites, of electrical trees. It's an electrical universe. The transverse wave, red shift, blue shift, is electrical. It is denki. Thank you, Japanese language. And so, but the other words, ball and tor, arbol, well, that's tree. Arbor, R and L being interchangeable, is tree. And then tor is also the tori. The tree is a torus field. So in whatever way you look at it, atum means tree, it means light, it means electricity, it means the monad, it means the dyad, it means man, Adam.
Have you heard of the helical heart? Are you familiar with that term?
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
So the man who discovered this was a medical doctor, a Spanish medical doctor, named Francisco Torrent Guasp. And this was a man who had a very hard time believing the official story that was told about how the cardiovascular system functions, that the little heart, as it's pumping, is able to push out the blood to what they say is somewhere around 60,000 miles of blood vessels in the body. And it's supposedly pushing the blood out to the very tips of our body, and then it's passively filling on relaxation. And he was just like, this doesn't make any sense. How is the blood getting back? How is it getting out? It's not, it doesn't add up. And so he spent decades trying to figure out the puzzle, and he was able to unravel the puzzle quite literally as he started to dissect hearts after having boiled them and removing the outer fatty layers. He was literally able to unravel the heart, and he discovered that the heart is actually one continuous band. We're taught that it's this pumping mechanism that has 4 separate chambers, and that they fire in a particular order, and that's how the body continues, But in reality, what it is a toroidal field, and he was the one who discovered this, that first of all, that it was a band, and then that band is rolled up. And when it fires, it goes from one end of the band to the other, the contraction. And so it actually sets up a toroidal field inside the heart, and that is how the blood is being moved throughout the body. And it also solves this question of the suction. How is the blood returning to the heart? And I mean, I did a whole video on this topic called, what was it called? It has helical hearts in the title. And it's utterly amazing. And going back to the whole idea of synchronicities, I found all of these hearts, and then learning about the helical heart and about Torrent Guasp and what he had discovered caused me to recognize a number of features in the stones that I had already gathered that I hadn't seen before, because I didn't understand how the heart rolled up and over, and you had these sections of the heart that overlapped, and those overlaps are actually curved lines in the rocks. So that's what I cover in that video, and I show that evidence. But the amazing synchronicity is that this man, Guasp, who made this discovery, he worked in private practice for his whole career, and for decades his work wasn't even recognized, and finally it started to catch on, but it still hasn't been integrated into cardiac operations and research to this day. It utterly changes how we think about the heart and the function of the heart, but they're still teaching the 4-chamber pumping, narrative, which is just utter BS. And this guy proved it unequivocally. And the amazing is he did it all by himself in his own little laboratory in his kitchen over many, many years with the help of his wife. And he finally was recognized internationally, and he gave the lecture of his life in Madrid in front of some of the top cardiologists in the world. He actually dissected a heart there in front of all of them, and then he went home that night after standing ovations and died that evening in his hotel room, which is a tragic finish, but at least he got some recognition there at the very end for his discoveries. But this was the mind-blowing synchronicity, is that this man who made all of these discoveries about the heart, who also caused me to discover new things that I was finding in the rocks, he happens to lived, he's passed away now, he lived in Denia, the town that's just across from me on the other side of Montgo's trunk. So he literally lived his whole life 10 minutes from where I've been working and living for the last 8 years, and where I've made all of these discoveries.
Well, did you just hear what you said? Denia. I heard that at the start of the show. Yeah.
Dendrites.
When I asked you, yes, brother, at the root, you just said at the root of the tree, right? Denia.
Yes.
Dendrites. It's all dendrites.
Well, the original name of the town that I live in is Xabia. What does that say to you? Anything interesting? It's pronounced Chabia. It's like Javia to the English speakers, or Chabia to the natives.
Yeah, there you go. It sounds like Javier. That's fire to me. Javiel, javelin, Javiel, Javel. It's that fire, salvation, Xavier. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I have you heard of Frank Chester and the Chesterhedron?
I haven't. I've seen a little bit about it. Somebody sent me a link after seeing my videos and said you should check this out, and I didn't get enough into it to other than the fact that it encodes the spirals and the sacred geometry and everything. I wasn't really able to make a direct connection with the things I'd been working on at the time. I'll have to revisit it.
You have to revisit Frank Chester, and you will understand the Chesterhedron, the shape, the polyhedra that he discovered, which is the one that morphs from the tetra to the hexa to the octa to the icosa. He has discovered how they morph, how they go into each other, and it's a seven-sided, seven-faced polyhedra, and it comes from the heart. The heart is doing this. The heart is in that Chesterhedron shape, and I believe the heart is the bowl of the arbol of the hyperbola. It is a pulsing, rhythmic mechanism of the hyperbola, and the pulse wave is the radiation wave. The heart radiates, it's a pulse. Hence, it is beating. Hence, it is not a transverse wave. It is not primarily electrical, it is magnetic. It is a magnetic transformer, and it transforms and makes all the transverse waves which make the electrical effect of the body. The heart is the anagram for earth, which is the accretion disk in the torus field of your body. Hence, the heart is projecting horizontally outwardly on its plane of inertia of the torus.
I was just going to say, now I was reminded of the plane of inertia, which is also, that sounds like
planet
Earth.
Of Eartha.
Yes, planet of Eartha.
Yeah, that's what I've brought out many times in my presentations for the last 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
So it is. And the torso is the God. Man is the measure of the universe. God made man in his image. Man makes God in his image. And men are immortal, are mortal gods, and gods are immortal men. So again, I finished with those words second week in a row on the radio show. We've gone over about 10 minutes, but that's cool because we started late and everything like that. But I'm sure I'd like to have you on another time, Mike, as both of us continue in our researches and
there's a lot of overlaps.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm thinking we will have you back sooner rather than later. So thanks for joining me. And
it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, just once more for the listeners, what's your contact details, etc., and we'll close off.
Yeah, so the channel name is Stellium7. It's spelled Stellium, and then the number 7. And if you can't find it that way, search for Unveiling a Titan. I definitely recommend watching that whole series because the first video will kind of have you maybe shaking your head, and the second video is going to be like, what? And then by the third and the fourth videos, if you're not a believer, I would be surprised. But the fifth video really drives the point home with what I discovered about the eyeball and also the censorship on the part of Google Earth. So I created a backup channel also called True Geology, which it has no action on it at all. It's just an additional place to put the videos because I noticed there were times where I had rollbacks of some view counts and I had chunks of subscribers that disappeared in a single day, which was very odd. So it appears that I'm being shadow banned even though I have a very small channel. And then I also created a BitChute account with the same name. So Stellium7 on BitChute. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can find contact information in the liner notes of the videos.
Thanks, Mike. Well, keep in touch, and when you've got some big revelations, let me know, and we'll see if we can't squeeze you in or get you back again, because I would love to chat more along all of these lines. The world is changing before our eyes. We are being transformed and our consciousness is expanding. So things are going to reveal themselves. It's the apocalypse, the Greeks call the apocalypse. It is the unveiling of Isis's veil. So thank you. Thanks, Mike, for joining me, and thanks, friends, for listening, and we'll see you next week. I think I'm going to take the show myself next week. I want to do a show on raising the chrism and how to go about this process. So, I think I will. So, thank you, PFP listeners and everyone.
Hello, folks. This is Jordan Maxwell. It's a pleasure, again, to be able to talk with you, and I've been trying to wake people up to the facts of life that's going on the earth today. And this is what I'm known for. This is what I love doing, is trying to teach people and educate them. I have a piece of knowledge that you need to know about. There is a radio operation going on called People for People Radio, and I am delighted that I have been able to be on the People for People Radio, and I want to invite all of you to go to People for People Radio. Go on the web and find it and follow all the programs on People to People Radio. Fascinating stuff, I tell you.
Also,
thank you for hearing.
More about gel coat.